Abuses of Power in Sports, a case study by Justin Yoon. This is a picture of Zion Williamson, a college basketball athlete, and this is another college athlete in playing American football, and this is a Russian track athlete. And the things that all these athletes have in common are that they're taken advantage of in their workplace. My research question for this investigation was, to what extent do unequal power dynamics cause constraints for athletes, and what are the possible solutions to create a more ethical environment for these athletes? Analyzed with reference to examples from the NCAA and the Russian government. What are power dynamics? Power dynamics describe how power affects the relationship between two parties. Power is the ability to achieve a purpose. Whether or not it is good or bad depends upon the purpose. By Martin Luther King. The 4 ways power can be used is power within, power to, power with, and power over, which is what is happening in my 2 examples that I will provide. Power over is when one party exerts power in the form of control or influence over another. So today I'll be exploring 2 cases. One is in the NCAA, where college athletes are prohibited to earn money from their school. So they aren't allowed to have a salary, have endorsements, or any kind of personal businesses. And the main problem is that the NCAA reaches a really large revenue of over $1 billion during the 2016 to 2017 school year. And the coaches get paid millions of dollars, but then the athletes do not earn anything. And the NCAA is able to use scholarships as an excuse for this, but it's not valid, as I'll explain later on. And this is how college athletes are taken advantage of in the US. In my second case, it's where the Russian government was exposed for systematic doping, where they pressured their athletes to take performance-enhancing drugs for decades. Athletes were pressured by their coaches and medical staff, who were in turn pressured by the government. And these athletes who got injured no longer received protection from the government. And then these athletes face lifetime bans from competition, or they faced bans from competition, and their careers were jeopardized. And this abuse of power has been happening for over 30 years, around 30 years, and it is in the national level in Russia. So the SEEP or GRIPE factors are social, economic, environmental, political, and geographic, religious, political, economic, and social. For both of my cases, it has SEEP and GRIPE factors, because in the NCAA, there's an economic abuse of power, and in the Russian government abuses its political power. So why is this power abuse happening? In both cases, those who hold power over the athletes take advantage of those with less power, who are the athletes, to benefit their financial interests and image or reputation. The athletes fall victim to this abuse of power because they are trapped in a system where they have no other choice to go to. Their individualism is not valued, leading to them being controlled and manipulated by those in power. It is hard for athletes to break free from the system, especially since it is the current status quo. In 2013, former UCLA player Ed O'Bannon filed a federal lawsuit against EA Sports for its popular NCAA basketball game, which featured him as a player over whether college featured him as a player. The lawsuit was about whether college basketball/football players should be compensated for the commercial use of their name. The final outcome of the lawsuit was that even though it was unlawful for the NCAA to not pay its players, its compensation through scholarships frees itself from antitrust violations. The NCAA argued that amateurism keeps it from becoming an anti-competitive trust. In the NCAA guidebook, principle of amateurism states that, quote, student athletes shall be amateurs in an intercollegiate sport, and their participation should be motivated primarily by education and by the physical, mental, and social benefits to be derived. Student participation in intercollegiate athletics is an avocation, as student athletes should be protected from exploitation by professional and commercial enterprises. The NCAA's former Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Oliver Lux, stated that it would be a bad mistake to create campus employer-employee relationships with student athletes. Paying college athletes would distract in a very significant way from pursuing what they really need to pursue, an education. And we need to emphasize the value of that education. No matter how much money is made, the most important thing for these students is their education, according to the NCAA. They are saying that if you give student athletes a contract, they may become distracted from their education. They also state that as their arguments that if you're going to pay the football player and basketball players, then you have to pay the field hockey players, swimmers, lacrosse players, etc. due to federal laws, and universities don't really want this to happen. Former student athletes, however, argue that the time commitment of playing a college sport impedes their ability to take advantage of their free education. Quote, show me how you're going to get all your work done when you get out of practice at 7:30 in the morning, 7:30 in the p.m., and you've got a test the next day. You're dead tired from practice, and you've still got to study just as hard as everyone else every day and get all the same work done. Richard Sherman, college athlete. Quote, if we're demanding 8-10 hours a day from our athletes to do stuff, it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for schoolwork. So you really don't get that academic experience through a college athlete. CBS Sports published a study with data from the Pac-12, the league Richard Sherman played in while at Stanford. A survey was sent out to 400 student athletes and found that 54% of athletes say they do not have enough time to study for tests. 80% of athletes say that they have missed a class for a competition during the 2014 to 2015 academic year. Qualitative data suggested that students say that even practices prevent them from attending class, review sessions, or that they are too exhausted to study effectively, and that athletic stress negatively impacts their academic focus. Student athletes feel they have the resources to succeed academically, but they just don't have the time to do so. Another example of how free scholarships aren't really beneficial for the athletes is that the University of North Carolina was found to have committed academic fraud for around 18 years in order to keep their athletes playing. Advisors enrolled athletes in paper classes, which were fake classes used to inflate their GPAs. Another example of how these players were taken advantage of is when a player named Kyle Hendricks injured his knee and had to spend a lot of money for surgeries. The university rescinded his scholarship and he did not get to finish school. His family was stuck with a 5-figure bill that they could not afford due to their poor background. The college's main goal is to educate people, but in 2013, 21,000 football players were injured. Of those, 800 were serious spinal injuries. When these players got hurt, they lose their scholarships and have to pay all of their medical expenses by themselves. Quote, in most cases, these student athletes are not receiving the education that they are promised, the cost of which by law is how they are compensated for playing this sport, end quote, by Business Insider. Case 2, the Russian doping scandal. Quote, systematic doping in Russian sports has resulted in 47 Olympic and tens of World Championship medals being stripped from Russian athletes, the most of any country, more than 4 times the number of the runner-up, and more than 30% of the global total, end quote, by 60 Minutes. Yulia Stefanova is a Russian athlete specializing in the 800-meter track event. For more than 5 years, she has been using anabolic steroids for strength and a substance called EPO for endurance. All of this was directed by Russian coaches and medical staff. The drugs she has taken include testosterone, tirnobolin, and parabolin. Quote, "It is hard to believe you're doing something wrong when everyone around you says it's right, and there's no other way that you are shown," by Yulia Stefanova. She was classified as an untouchable, meaning that she could take any performance-enhancing drugs without the fear of being caught, by being protected by the Russian government. When Yulia Stefanova was injured and no longer a medal contender, she lost the protection of the system and tested positive for EPO. She faced a 2-year ban from any competition. Yulia Stefanova decided to expose the whole system in Russia to the world and used their phone to record her coaches giving her drugs, teammates detailing the drug use, and her team's medical coordinator telling her how to get back on the drug program. Yulia Stefanova later fled to the United States to hide from Russian KGB agents in fear of her life. Another example of how Russian athletes were taken advantage of is an athlete named Fyodorov, who was a Russian track athlete who was affected by the ban. Quote, "Ahead of the ruling, I was feeling more positive every day. But after they kept the ban in place, no matter how I tried to distance myself, it's really hit my nerves hard. I've fallen into a pit, and I now need to find a way out. It is going to be very, very hard to compete there. Very hard." End quote. His life's ambition was to compete in the Olympics, but now it seems like he won't get a chance. The Russian government took advantage of their athletes so that there was a higher chance of success at the Olympics. Succeeding at the Olympics improves a country's economy and their reputation or image. The Russian government wanted their country to seem more powerful and stronger than their rivals, which is the United States. In the first case, it has visible power, since the power dynamics between the school and its athletes are determined by official rules that are open to the public. Case 2 used to be hidden power before the Russian government got exposed. The Russian government controlled what was going on behind the scenes through its many lies and deceptions. This has recently been exposed, so it is now considered as visible power. Spaces of power. Both of these examples are set in a closed space of power. Rules, decisions, and ideas are kept behind closed doors with a select group of people. They do not receive consultation or participation from others outside this group. These are kept away from the public until they are finalized and unveiled. In the NCAA and the Russian government, this happens with different officials such as the president and vice president. The decisions created by these people in the NCAA are made public. However, the Russian government has tried to keep this hidden. Levels of power. Both of these examples are at the national scale. The NCAA is an organization for college sports in the US, and the Russian government is responsible for the systematic doping in its country. Conclusion. To answer my research question, to what extent do unequal power dynamics cause constraints for athletes, and what are the possible solutions to create a more ethical environment for these athletes? So what is currently being done to equalize this power dynamic? There are multiple lawsuits against the NCAA in the last 10 years that have failed. Players and media are voicing their concerns and demanding fair treatment. A notable example of this is from a famous basketball player named LeBron James, who has recently called out the NCAA for taking advantage of its athletes. In Russia, the Russian athletes as well as the Russian flag have faced many bans from international competition following the multiple investigations on Russia's systematic doping. This led to key members of the Russian government being fired and replaced. We are still unsure of whether this has proved successful in a real effort to get rid of doping in Russia, or if it is just a ruse to please the media. What are the challenges and risks to change the power dynamics? The NCAA argues that changing these power dynamics could disrupt the atmosphere in colleges, leading to unequal treatment of athletes and sports teams. The NCAA also continues to argue that education should always be a student-athlete's first priority, and providing a salary could distract them from that. In case 2, Yulia Stefanova faced many risks when she tried to expose Russia's systematic doping. She had to flee the country to protect herself and her family. Even to this day, she receives death threats and hate messages from Russians, calling her a traitor. There are many instances of these kinds of things happening, such as when one of the Russian team doctors tried to expose how Russia secretly doped to the public through video conferencing calls, and he had to later flee to the United States. How can organizations, strategies, policies, and measures be part of the solution or used to support victims and advocate for change? A possible solution to help college athletes that are taken advantage of is to continue to voice concerns in an effort to change the NCAA's policies. Several media outlets have expressed ideas such as implementing a free market in the NCAA, where student athletes can be paid depending on their value determined by the school. Others say that having a fixed yearly salary for each college sport will help support the victims. For case 2, organizations such as WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, have made numerous investigations against the Russian government, accusing them of systematic doping over the past decades. This eventually culminated to Russia being banned from all international sports for 4 years. Key individuals responsible for taking advantage of these athletes have been persecuted over the past few years. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and these are the sources that I used.